The International Olympic Heritage Gala was unlike anything Cece had ever attended. It wasn't simply another celebrity event. There were no flashing nightclub lights. No staged entrances. No desperate race for attention. Instead, the evening celebrated excellence. Olympic champions, scientists, artists, designers, volunteers. People from every corner of the world gathered beneath the centuries-old marble halls of Rome's historic Palazzo della Civiltà. The room sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Live strings echoed softly through the ballroom. Conversations flowed in dozens of different languages. Yet somehow, everyone eventually found themselves looking toward one person. Cece Kang. She wore a gown she had quietly designed for herself. Ivory silk. Simple. Elegant. No dramatic embellishments. No oversized jewelry. She believed that true elegance never needed to announce itself. Standing beside Harper, she smiled as former Olympians congratulated her on the success of Team USA's uniforms. Gymnasts hugged her. Parents thanked her. Young designers nervously asked for photographs. She gave every single person her full attention. Harper watched her daughter with the same quiet smile she always had. No matter how famous Cece became, she never stopped seeing people. That, Harper believed, was her greatest gift. Across the ballroom, Alexander had arrived nearly 30 minutes earlier. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. No medals. No championship rings. No entourage. Just quiet confidence. His coach noticed immediately. "You've looked toward that entrance 17 times. Alexander didn't deny it. "I counted." Alexander chuckled. "I wasn't aware." "You weren't." The older man grinned. "You've never waited for anyone before." Alexander smiled to himself. "Apparently, I have now." At exactly 7:18 p.m., the ballroom doors opened. The room instinctively turned. Cece entered beside Harper. Not because she wanted attention, but because attention naturally followed her. Alexander saw her immediately. His breathing slowed. She somehow looked even more beautiful than she had that afternoon. Not because of the dress. Not because of the lights. Because she seemed completely unaware that hundreds of people had stopped talking. She wasn't walking into a room to be admired. She was simply walking. His grandmother once told him, "You'll recognize the right woman because she won't know she's extraordinary." For the first time, Alexander understood exactly what she meant. The evening continued. Dinner was served. Awards were presented. Olympic champions shared stories. Fashion executives congratulated Cece. Yet Alexander never interrupted. Several opportunities presented themselves. Each time, he waited. His coach finally leaned over. "If you wait much longer, she'll leave." Alexander nodded. "I know. So go." Alexander looked across the ballroom. She deserves to finish every conversation without someone interrupting. His coach laughed quietly. "You really are different." Nearly 45 minutes later, the ballroom began to empty. Television crews packed away their equipment. Guests slowly filtered toward the courtyard overlooking Rome. Cece finally found a quiet moment. She stepped outside onto the terrace. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the warm Roman air. She closed her eyes for a moment. Finally, silence. Beautiful city. She turned. Standing several feet away was the tall Russian boxer she'd noticed earlier in the evening. She recognized him instantly. Alexander Sokolov. Olympic champion. She smiled politely. "It really is." He suddenly realized. Every sentence he had practiced had completely disappeared. For the first time in years, Alexander Sokolov was nervous. "So," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to congratulate you." Cece smiled. "For what?" He looked genuinely confused. "For..." He paused. "Everything." She laughed. Not because he sounded foolish. Because his honesty caught her completely off guard. "Everything?" Alexander nodded. "The uniforms. The interview. The athletes. The way you treat people." She tilted her head slightly. You noticed all that? I notice everything. The words escaped before he could stop them. For a split second, they simply looked at one another. Then Alexander quickly added, I mean, I noticed because I admire kindness. Cece smiled again. So you're observant. I try to be. There was no awkwardness anymore. Only curiosity. Harper stood inside the ballroom speaking with another guest. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed her daughter talking with Alexander. She watched carefully. Not because she distrusted him. Because mothers notice things. Especially mothers like Harper Kang. She watched Alexander's body language. He wasn't standing too close. He wasn't trying to impress Cece. He wasn't bragging about championships. He wasn't flirting. He was simply listening. Every time Cece spoke, Alexander listened as though no one else existed. Harper quietly smiled to herself. Interesting. Outside, their conversation continued. They talked about Rome. Alexander admitted he loved ancient architecture. Cece confessed she visited museums every time she traveled. He asked what inspired her designs. She answered without hesitation. People. Not trends. She shook her head. Trends disappear. People don't. Alexander smiled. I like that. She asked him what boxing felt like. He thought for a moment. It feels like having a conversation where neither person speaks. Cece blinked. That's unexpectedly beautiful. My grandmother says boxing teaches honesty. How? You can't pretend inside a ring. She considered that. Fashion is the opposite. Alexander looked curious. What do you mean? People often wear clothing to become who they wish they were. He nodded slowly. That's beautiful too. For nearly an hour, they spoke about books, family, travel, music, art. Neither mentioned politics. Neither mentioned international conflict. Neither mentioned Russia. Neither mentioned America. Because for one evening, they weren't representatives of nations. They were simply two people discovering they enjoyed one another's company. Eventually Harper walked outside. She smiled warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Alexander immediately stood a little straighter. Not at all. Cece laughed. Mom, this is Alexander. Harper extended her hand. I know exactly who you are. Alexander smiled respectfully. And you're Dr. Harper Kang. I've heard wonderful things. Harper smiled. I hope most of them were true. They were. Something about his answer made Harper pause. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't charming. It was sincere. She noticed the way he looked at Cece. Not with possession. Not with infatuation. But with admiration. It reminded her of someone. Years ago. A young law student named Michael. As the evening drew to a close, guests began calling for their cars. Alexander hesitated. He almost said goodbye. Almost. Instead, he gathered every ounce of courage he possessed. Miss Kang. Cece looked up. I was wondering. He smiled nervously. Would you allow me to buy you a coffee tomorrow? Not a private dinner. Not an expensive restaurant. Not a yacht. Not a luxury suite. Coffee. Simple. Normal. Human. Cece didn't answer immediately. She looked at Harper. Her mother simply smiled. Then Cece looked back at Alexander. I think. She smiled. I'd like that. Alexander couldn't remember the last time winning an Olympic gold medal had made him feel less excited than hearing those three words. I'd like that. Neither of them noticed the freelance photographer across the street. He raised his camera, clicked once, and unknowingly captured the photograph that, within 48 hours, would become the most talked about image in the world. Because by tomorrow afternoon, the internet would believe it knew their story, long before their story had even begun. The next morning, Rome looked exactly the same. The sun climbed over centuries-old cathedrals. Tourists filled the cobblestone streets. Athletes prepared for competition. Cafes opened their doors. Nothing had changed. Except for two people. Cece woke before sunrise. Not because she couldn't sleep. She simply wanted to enjoy Rome before the city became crowded. She slipped into a simple cream linen outfit, tied her hair into a loose ponytail, and quietly left her hotel suite with a sketchbook tucked beneath her arm. Harper smiled as she watched her daughter leave. Coffee? Cece nodded. And maybe a croissant. Harper laughed. I'll see you later. Across the city, Alexander had barely slept. Not from nervousness. From excitement. He wasn't thinking about the Olympics. He wasn't thinking about defending his gold medal. He wasn't thinking about boxing at all. He kept replaying their conversation. Every smile. Every laugh. Every thoughtful answer. His coach noticed immediately. You smiled while brushing your teeth. Alexander looked confused. So? You've never smiled brushing your teeth. Alexander laughed. I suppose that's true. At exactly 9 o'clock, they met outside a quiet cafe overlooking the Tiber River. No security. No television cameras. No assistants. No designers. No coaches. Just two people. Alexander stood when Cece arrived. You came. Cece smiled. You sound surprised. I am. Why? He shrugged. I wasn't sure someone as busy as you would have time for coffee. Cece laughed softly. Alexander. She looked around the nearly empty cafe. I made time. Those 3 words settled warmly in his chest. Their conversation flowed effortlessly. No awkward pauses. No forced questions. No attempts to impress one another. Alexander asked what she enjoyed doing when she wasn't designing. She smiled. I draw. You already design. I know. But I draw for myself. What do you draw? Places. People. My family. She looked out over the river. I think drawing helps me remember how something made me feel. Alexander nodded. I understand that. You draw? He smiled. No. I read. You read? Every day. Cece looked genuinely surprised. What kinds of books? History. Poetry. Philosophy. She laughed. I wasn't expecting that. Most people don't. An hour became 2. Neither noticed. Alexander spoke about his grandmother. How she had raised him. How she believed kindness was stronger than power. Cece listened carefully. Then quietly said, She sounds like someone I would have loved. Alexander smiled. I think she would have loved you too. Meanwhile, across Rome, Harper wandered through a small art museum while waiting for Cece to finish. Her phone buzzed. Michael. She answered immediately. Hi. How's Rome? She smiled. Beautiful. How's our daughter? Harper laughed. Having coffee. With who? There was a pause. Then Harper answered honestly. A boxer. Silence. Finally Michael laughed. I didn't have that on my bingo card. Harper smiled. Neither did I. What do you think? Harper considered the question. I think. He's a genuinely kind young man. Another pause. Then Michael asked the question only a father would ask. How does he look at her? Harper smiled to herself. Like she's the only person in the room. Michael became quiet. That's how I still look at you. I know. Back at the cafe, Alexander and Cece were laughing. She had just attempted to pronounce a Russian phrase. It went terribly. Alexander laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Oh, that was bad? It was adorable. I'll take adorable. As they stood to leave, Alexander noticed an elderly couple struggling to carry luggage down a short flight of stone steps. Without saying a word, he walked over, picked up both heavy suitcases, carried them to the taxi waiting below. The older woman thanked him repeatedly. He simply smiled. My grandmother would have been upset if I didn't help. Cece watched the entire interaction. He never looked around to see if anyone noticed. He didn't do it because she was watching. He did it because helping someone simply felt natural. Something inside her shifted. Just slightly. Neither of them noticed the freelance photographer sitting across the street. He had originally been photographing Olympic landmarks. Then he recognized Cece Kang. He lifted his camera. Click, click, click. One photo captured Alexander smiling as he held the cafe door open for Cece. Another showed them laughing. One showed Alexander carrying the elderly woman's suitcase while Cece watched. The photographer smiled. Nice human interest story. He uploaded the images to his agency before lunch. He had no idea what would happen next. By late afternoon, the photographs reached European media outlets, then American entertainment websites, then sports journalists, then social media. Within 2 hours, millions had seen them. The headlines appeared almost instantly. America's fashion icon seen with Russian Olympic champion. Who is the mystery man with Cece Kang? Olympic romance. Comment sections exploded. Most people weren't angry. They were curious. Some admired the photographs. Others immediately began asking questions. Who is he? How long have they known each other? Is this serious? Meanwhile, back in California, Kai was sitting in his LA apartment when his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. He opened Instagram. His jaw dropped. His sister's face covered the entire trending page, right beside a Russian boxer he'd never seen before. He immediately called home. Michael answered. Hey son. Dad. Have you looked at Instagram today? Michael frowned. No. You probably should. 30 seconds later, Michael stared at the photographs. Harper called at the exact same moment. He answered immediately. I was just looking. Harper sighed. So, you've seen them? Michael smiled. I have. What do you think? He looked at the photo again. Alexander wasn't touching Cece. He wasn't posing. He wasn't trying to attract attention. He was simply laughing. And in every picture, his eyes were on Cece. Not the cameras. Not the crowd. Her. Michael smiled quietly. I think someone forgot to tell this young man that our daughter wasn't planning on falling in love. Harper laughed. I don't think she got the memo either. Neither of them realized. Across America, millions of people were beginning to feel strangely protective. Not because they hated Alexander. Most of them knew nothing about him. They simply loved Cece. She wasn't just a designer. She felt like family. And when someone feels like family, people naturally worry about who might break their heart. The world wasn't turning against Cece. The world was preparing to protect her, whether she wanted that protection or not. Morning television opened with her story. Is America's favorite designer dating? Fashion podcasts discussed Alexander's tuxedo. Sports analysts suddenly became fashion critics. Late-night comedians made harmless jokes. Social media exploded with edits of the two laughing together in Rome. Millions commented. I've never seen her smile like that. He looks respectful. She deserves happiness. Others remained cautious. I hope she's careful. She barely knows him. Fame attracts the wrong people. Those comments weren't hateful. They were protective. At Kang Fashion House headquarters in Los Angeles, the executive conference room was unusually quiet. Marketing directors watched social media numbers climb by the second. One executive finally broke the silence. We've gained another 8 million followers overnight. Another looked up. Our website traffic has doubled. The communications director sighed. Everyone is asking the same question. What's that? Who is Alexander Sokolov? Meanwhile, Cece remained blissfully unaware. She and Harper spent the morning visiting historic churches throughout Rome. No interviews. No photographers. Just mother and daughter. As they wandered through centuries-old architecture, Harper noticed something. Cece seemed lighter. Not distracted. Just happy. Harper smiled. You've smiled a lot today. Cece looked confused. I have. You have. I didn't notice. Harper laughed quietly. Exactly. Later that afternoon, Harper's phone rang. Michael. She answered immediately. Hey. You've got about 20 minutes before your peaceful vacation ends. Harper laughed. I figured. Michael's voice became more serious. The board of directors from Kang Fashion House just called. And they're worried. Harper frowned. About what? The attention. Harper stopped walking. They're worried about a coffee? They're worried about the headlines. Harper sighed. I'll talk to Cece. That evening, mother and daughter sat together on the balcony, overlooking Rome. The city glowed beneath the setting sun. Harper handed Cece her phone. I think it's time. Cece looked down. Her eyes widened. Oh. She scrolled. Headline after headline. Photo after photo. Comments. Millions of comments. She looked up. This is a lot. Harper nodded. It is. Cece kept reading. Most comments were kind. Some were funny. Others were filled with concern. Finally she looked at her mother. Why do people care so much? Harper smiled gently. Because they love you. Cece frowned. But they don't know me. Harper shook her head. They've watched you grow up. They celebrated your first collection. They watched you design Olympic uniforms. They've watched our family for years. She reached for her daughter's hand. Sometimes admiration becomes affection. And affection becomes protectiveness. Cece looked back toward the city lights. They're afraid he'll hurt me. Some are. But not because they know him. They don't. Across Rome, Alexander sat in his hotel room reading the same headlines. His coach walked in carrying dinner. You've become famous. Alexander looked up. I already was. His coach laughed. No, you were respected. He tossed the newspaper onto the table. Now you're the man standing next to Cece Kang. Alexander glanced at the front page. His expression changed. For the first time, he looked worried. What if this causes problems for her? His coach studied him carefully. You've been hit by heavyweights from 6 different countries. I've never seen you this concerned. Alexander answered honestly. I'm not worried about me. He looked at the newspaper again. I don't want her paying the price for simply having coffee. Meanwhile, over 5,000 miles away, Michael Kong sat alone in his home office. He stared at the photographs spread across his desk. Not because he doubted Alexander. Because he recognized something. He had spent decades practicing law. He understood headlines. He understood public perception. He understood how quickly narratives could be created. Then quietly, he picked up his phone. He called Harper. She answered immediately. I know why you're calling. Michael smiled. Do you? I do. He leaned back in his chair. I don't think our daughter understands what she's walking into. Harper looked toward Cece, who was still peacefully sketching Rome on the balcony. No, she whispered. I don't think she does either. Michael's voice grew thoughtful. The hardest part isn't whether Alexander is a good man. I think he probably is. The hardest part is that the world won't judge him as a man. They'll judge him by everything they think they know before they've ever met him. Harper quietly nodded. And that's what scares me. Neither parent wanted to keep Cece from love. Neither questioned Alexander's character. Their concern was something much larger. They knew how quickly fear could overshadow truth. And they knew their daughter was about to discover that loving someone publicly was very different than loving someone privately. The next morning, Alexander would ask Cece to spend one more day exploring Rome together. She would say yes. The internet did what the internet often does. It filled empty spaces with assumptions. Alexander ignored every headline. Instead, he was standing outside a small cafe near the Spanish Steps. 9 o'clock. Exactly where he and Cece had agreed to meet. He checked his watch. Not because she was late. Because he wanted to make sure he wasn't. His grandmother had always said, if someone is important to you, never make them wait. 5 minutes later, Cece appeared. No designer entourage. No photographers. Just a simple yellow floral dress. Alexander smiled. You came. She laughed. You seem surprised every time. I probably will. Why? Because I know how busy you are. Cece smiled. And I know how busy you are. They began walking through Rome. No destination. Just conversation. They wandered through quiet streets before tourists arrived. Alexander stopped in front of an old fountain. My grandmother always wanted to see this. Did she? She studied Roman history. Why didn't she come? Alexander smiled gently. She said Rome deserved younger knees. Cece laughed. I already like her. I think she'd already like you. Hours passed. For the first time in years. Both of them experienced something neither was accustomed to. Normal. Cece watched him. You really don't like attention, do you? Alexander looked genuinely confused. I already have enough attention. She nodded slowly. As they crossed a narrow stone bridge, Alexander finally asked something he'd been wondering. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you stay so normal? Cece laughed. I'm not sure I am. I think you are. She looked out across the river. My parents. Alexander listened. They never cared whether I became famous. They cared whether I became kind. She smiled. My dad always says, character is the only thing success can't replace. Alexander quietly repeated the sentence to himself. I like your father already. You haven't even met him. I know. Meanwhile, inside Kong Fashion House headquarters, an emergency meeting was underway. Around the conference table sat executives, attorneys, publicists, and brand managers. A large screen displayed one simple headline. Cece Kang and Russian Olympian continue spending time together. Silence filled the room. Finally, the communications director spoke. This isn't a crisis. Everyone looked toward her. It's uncertainty. She continued. People aren't angry. They're asking questions. Another executive nodded. America loves Cece. They're protective. That's different. One board member sighed. But investors don't like uncertainty. Will fate separate them before they ever get the chance? Find out next week. In episode 3 of Cece Kang's story. Until then, remember, sometimes the person who changes your life forever is already walking toward you. To be continued.